Hey guys, how is it going? Thank you so much for joining me on the vlog today. Today I have a very special episode of the vlog. I'm actually going to review this camera right here, which is the Canon EOS 650 camera. As most of you are aware of, I have a lot of film cameras, I have a lot of SLRs, and this camera right here is one of my absolute favorite cameras to shoot with. So I'm going to be talking about different aspects of this camera. I will talk about some general overview. I'll give some general information about this camera. I'll talk about the parts, some parts and features of this camera. And then I will delve into the pros and the cons of this camera. So let's get to it. So the Canon EOS 650 camera is an SLR. That means that it's a single lens reflex camera, which implies that if you, for example, open this up here, take off the lens, it has the mirror in there which reflects basically the image that's coming through the lens and right into the viewfinder. Now the Canon EOS 650 is the world's first EOS camera. When it was first manufactured in the 1980s, it was targeted towards advanced amateurs, and this was in a period where Canon was trying to establish itself as one of the go-tos for professional photographers. It's a great camera for those that are looking to transition into film photography because it's automatic. 3 frames per second is really all that this camera offers, which is very small compared to what modern digital cameras can offer. But back in the day, that was actually quite advanced for a camera to have that feature. And to be honest, as a film photographer, do you really want to be shooting more than 3 frames per second at any given instant? I don't think so, because film is pretty expensive. So 3 frames per second is actually a really nice feature to have. One of the really beautiful things about this camera is that it has a fully automatic film advance feature on it. So that means once you shoot, you don't have to manually advance it. Now that could be a pro or a con. For me personally, that is not a deal breaker for me, because I actually enjoy physically manually advancing the film. But this camera comes with that built in, so you don't have to. One additional feature that this camera has is right there is the rear control buttons right there. And from these you'll be able to tell, for example, the battery life of the camera, which appears here on the LCD screen. It has controls for ISO, so you can press the orange and blue button together and you'll be able to control the ISO setting. The beautiful thing about this camera is that it's compatible with a host of Canon lenses, such as the Canon EOS EF, L, USM, and IS lenses, both the past and the present lenses. So that's a really nice thing, that you have a host of lenses available to you. To turn on the camera, you use this front control dial right here, and the front control dial has 4 settings. So there is an L setting, which I'm gonna show right there. So that's actually the lock position, which it means it's off. When you flick it to the A setting over here, that is the auto setting, and that's your normal on position, and that's really the position that most people would be shooting on under normal circumstances. When you switch it from the lock position to the auto position, that's actually going to restore your previous setting that you were shooting with. And the moment you put it on that, you'll notice that the LCD screen also lights up, right? So that is the auto position. Now if you switch it to the beeper position right here. That's the next position here. The beeper position enables you to have it will give you an audible warning if you're composing and your shutter speed falls below 1 divided by your focal length, basically of the lens on here. So right now I have the 50mm lens on this. So if my shutter speed at any instance falls below 1/50th of a second, it's going to give me that audible beep, and that allows me to know that I could be my image that I'm composing may have a blur effect in it. So that's a feature that they built into this camera. If you switch this to the other direction from the lock position, so that is the lock position. If I switch it one more step, there's the green, it's a rectangle. So that green rectangle that's a fully auto mode. And the fully auto mode basically puts your camera in the program mode, and it locks out all the major features. You won't be able to change the aperture or the shutter speed, and that's a convenient thing to have. So the camera does all the thinking for you. So if you're composing and you don't want to have to, or you're a beginner and you don't want to have to worry about all the settings on this camera, you can just set it there and go and shoot and be happy. You will not have the flexibility of being able to adjust to fit the situation or to fit the mood or your personal preferences, but it will do the work, a reasonable amount of work for you. So that's a good thing to have. One other feature that I also want to mention is that the LCD screen is so simple. That's one of the things that make it such a great camera for beginners and also for those that are looking to transition into film photography. So now I'm gonna go through the LCD screen. The moment you turn this on, let's turn this back from the lock position, which is off, to the on position, which is the A position over there. When I do that, this here will indicate that it will indicate the mode that you're in, okay? And the mode is controlled by this button here. It's also controlled in combination with this dial over here. The first mode here is the manual mode, and the manual mode is indicated by the M mode, the M sign right there. The manual mode is with any camera. The manual mode just allows you the freedom of being able to choose your aperture setting or your own shutter speed as well. So in order to do that, this camera is so convenient. It has this little M here. So take note of this button here, because in the manual mode you're gonna need this. In the manual mode, just rotating this dial freely will allow you to change the shutter speed. Just take note, and you'll notice that the shutter speed changes, right? Just like that. Now if I want to change the aperture setting, which is right there, what I need to do is hold on to this manual mode, this manual button, this M button over here, and then it will display OP, and then I'm going to just move it just like that, and then that way I can change the aperture setting over there. Okay, when I release that button, now I can control the shutter speed. So that is the manual mode. Now I'm gonna switch from the manual mode into the next mode, which would be the program mode. So just as you see right there, same way, hold this down and dial, move the dial. Now it's in the program mode. So the program mode, as you can see, it tells you right here that is now manual focus, and that's because on this right here I have set it to manual focus, so on the lens itself. So that is the focus switch over here. So I can change my focus manually. If I want it to be autofocus in the program mode or in any mode, I will switch it to AF right there, and then this camera will do all the focusing just like that, right? As with any modern camera, which is a really convenient feature to have. So now I'm gonna go into the next mode, and same way, switch, and that would be the TV mode. And the TV mode would be the shutter priority mode. And in this mode, you're able to set your shutter speed just by moving this dial. And once you set your shutter speed, the camera will keep the shutter at that speed, but we'll adjust the aperture to ensure that you have a good exposure. So that is the shutter priority mode. The next mode would be the AV mode, and the AV mode is the aperture priority mode. And in this mode, you can still adjust for your aperture. So the camera, based on the aperture that you set, the camera will change the shutter speed to ensure that you have a good exposure. So that is the aperture. Aperture is now the priority. And let's move on to the next mode. And the next mode here is the depth mode, and that is a special mode that Canon built into this camera. I'm not going to go too much into in-depth in that feature, but it's not a feature that I use or many people use. It is a bit complicated, so I'm not really going to go into this. In the manual itself, there are 4 pages that just explain this feature alone, and it's a little complicated. I don't recommend using that. I don't use that feature at all. So let's talk about the stops, and the stops are basically a measure of the amount of light that is going on the sensor or on your film. One of the advantages of this camera is that you're able to reduce your stops in half stops, not just full stops, for the shutter speed and for the aperture. So for example, instead of going from your typical stop from 2, aperture 2, the next stop above will be 2.8. But on this camera, you're able to move it a half stop between 2 and 2.8, and that in this case is 2.5, and before you go to the 2.8, and that is very convenient to have. And that actually, you can do that in both the shutter speed, for the shutter speed and the aperture. So if, for example, for the shutter speed, you had to move from, why don't I change this setting to the shutter priority. So if, for example, you wanted to move from 1/125th to the next stop is 1/250, but instead you can actually move to 1/180, and that's a half a stop between 1/125 and 1/250. So the next stop will be the actual 1/250. So that's actually a really convenient feature to have on this camera. That gives you a finer controls on the settings, and it enables you to basically have more flexibility. And right over here, you will notice that on this camera, as with most modern cameras, you're able to actually change the exposure control as well, adjust it slightly, and you do that by holding onto this exposure control button here, and you can reduce it by, in this case, 0.5 stops, or half a stop, 1 stop, plus 1 stop, plus 1.5, 2 stops, and you can reduce it by a similar margin graduations as well. The camera comes with a flash mount, and as with most cameras, you're able to mount a normal flash here, which would be pushing it in and basically turning this until it sets and it's nice and fixed in there. So with the flash installed, with flash sync, the maximum shutter speed that you're looking at is 1/125th of a second, and without the flash sync, the maximum shutter speed would be 1/2000th of a second, and that's actually pretty fast. I want to talk about one beautiful feature about this camera here, and that's this little button over here. That's one that's easy to ignore, and this is actually the depth of field button here. Now when you press this button down, it allows you to look through the viewfinder and to see how this image will actually look like at the aperture setting that you have. It enables you to determine what aperture setting will be best depending on the condition that you're in. So having that ability to see how this image will actually look like is golden. It doesn't always work, especially in very bright conditions, but in normal shooting conditions, it's a very good feature to have. So I'm gonna demonstrate how to load film on this camera here. It's actually quite simple. You simply hold on to this button here, and in the same motion, you just in a sliding motion, you push onto this button here, and that will pop the back open. And I have some film here, so I'm just gonna take out the film and I'm gonna load this, and that should be pretty simple. Make sure your camera is on. Make sure it's turned on. Any mode would be acceptable. There are two sides to this canister. One is the part that protrudes and the part that sinks in. So you place the sunken part here to the top part here, and it falls right in place. And then you're gonna stretch the film until it's in line with this orange mark over here. Now as you do that, you'll notice that there are some, this is actually quite important. There are these rollers on this side here, and they have these notches on them. You just make sure that they fit into the groove properly before you close it. Unfortunately, my film is not cooperating, but this should work. And now I close it, and just like that, it tells me that the film is loaded and it's in position 1. Now the key was to put it in a reasonable spot, close to at least on top of those rollers, just so that it will catch onto it and be able to advance the film. Now, if that did not work, you would notice this film roll sign will be flashing, and that will indicate that your film is not loaded properly. So let's talk about the lens on this camera. So this camera, the one that I have here, currently has this 50 millimeter lens, which is a Canon lens, and the minimum aperture, or the maximum aperture that is 1.8 on this camera. If you on this lens, that is, if you want to take out the lens, you basically depress this button over here, and then you spin this in an anti-clockwise motion, and that will basically pop out the lens. To attach the lens, all you do is match this red mark over here with the red mark on the camera body, and once you do that, you can tell that it will fit in to the groove there, and then you spin it in a clockwise motion, and then you hear the click and the lens is attached. One other feature that I want to let you know about is when you're using the exposure compensation here, the moment you change the exposure compensation by pressing this button down like I mentioned before and changing the dial, the moment you let go, this icon shows on the LCD, and that just lets you know that the exposure compensation setting is activated. If I were to switch this exposure compensation back to 0, which is showing right there while I'm holding this down, I just changed it to 0, and if I let go, that icon just disappears. That means I'm shooting in the normal mode without exposure compensation. So let's talk about some of the pros of this camera. I've really enjoyed shooting with this camera. One of the beautiful things about this camera is certainly the build quality. The build quality is not made of metal. It's plastic, but it is not flimsily made. I don't know how else to describe it. It's actually well built. So I would say the build quality is moderate. And it comes with its advantages. So it's not as heavy as the Minolta SRT cameras. You can carry this for a longer period with one hand and not feel like you're really exhausted just by carrying the camera. The weight is 660 grams, so that is actually a really good thing. It's not too heavy, it's not too light. It feels pretty good in the hand. The grip is actually awesome. I love the grip on this camera. So it's the one hand grip. It's a good feature to have. It feels really good in the hand. The autofocus is very, very nice on this camera, which is one of the beautiful things about this camera. The autofocus is fast and is accurate. The viewfinder is awesome. It's large and it's very clear. There's an LCD display at the base of the viewfinder when you look through. That gives you information about the settings, the basic information about the setting that you have on. Sometimes it will display which mode you're in. Sometimes it will display the shutter speed and the aperture setting, and it's actually lit up LCD, which is awesome. It allows you to look through this in the nighttime and be able to see the setting that you're working with, and that's because the LCD screen doesn't light up on this particular camera here. So sometimes it's really good to have that lit display in there in the nighttime when you're shooting. It's good to have that feature. Another pro about this camera is that there are tons of lenses for this camera, both old and new lenses, as I mentioned previously. So there's a wide variety of beautiful lenses to choose from. The maximum shutter speed is 2000, which is awesome without the flash sync, of course, which is really a good thing to have. And that's because oftentimes in a bright conditions, in outdoor conditions, especially in Canada, where we have in the winter time when there's lots of snow, the glare is incredible, and it's hard to compose any decent image without really high shutter speeds. And having a shutter speed of 1/2000 seconds is awesome. The viewfinder also provides up to 94% coverage, and that means that whatever you see in the viewfinder is up to 94% of what the sensor or the film is actually going to capture, and that's actually very high because a lot of cameras don't even have that high coverage for the viewfinder. The depth of field preview on this camera is amazing. It's an amazing feature to have. Some of the expensive modern cameras have it, and just think about it, this camera was made in the 80s and it has that feature, so that is an awesome feature to have. Relatively, this camera is very quiet. It's not like some of the other cameras that I have with noisy drives. The display on this camera, like I mentioned, is just simple and intuitive. It's really not complicated at all. Once you figure it out, and I'm hoping that with this review I've shown enough of it to get some of you started. It's just so simple. It's just so nice to have it. It's not complicated at all, and that's certainly a pro. One thing that I appreciate about this camera. The half stops for the exposure compensation, the shutter speed, and the aperture are certainly a beautiful thing to have. The battery life on this camera is quite good, even though it takes only CR5 batteries, which is more expensive than your typical AA or AAA battery. It lasts long. So one battery, for example, can last up to 100 rolls of 36 exposure film. So the camera's battery life is actually very good. The power rewind on this camera is awesome. The moment you reach the end of your roll, this camera automatically rewinds, which is very convenient. Now let's talk about some of the cons on this camera. There aren't many, to be honest. There aren't many. The first thing that will come to mind would be this front control dial right here. It's in an awkward position, and sometimes it can be hard to flick it around. But the thing is, who cares? You're not really going to be changing this often in the middle of a shoot at all. I don't think you will be doing this at all. So it's just a one-time annoyance, but it's in an awkward position. I mean, considering that it's so close to the viewfinder, it can be an annoyance, just a minor annoyance. One thing I've noticed about this camera, I'm not sure if it's because of the age of the camera or it's just a general thing with these cameras, is the electronic component. At least two occasions I've had it act wonky on me, and with these cameras, generally they're not as reliable as your fully manual cameras. Number one, they use a battery, so if ever the battery dies, you can't really operate the camera and you're out of luck. Unlike a camera like the Minolta SRT 202, which I talked about, this one uses a battery. And the battery controls the shutter and also controls everything about this. So if the battery dies, you're out of luck, right? It's not manual at all. Sometimes the LCDs can fail with these cameras. If the LCD fails, you're out of luck as well. Because it's so heavily electronic, there's so much that can go wrong with these cameras. I certainly would not even think about dropping this camera, because I know something is gonna break on this camera. I know that I've dropped my manual cameras, and my manual cameras have been dropped. Those that I purchased on eBay, for example, I noticed dings on them. But the thing about those cameras, they're very sturdy. They don't rely on any electronics, so they work pretty well. These ones, you cannot afford to drop them. You cannot afford, there's so much that can go wrong with them. So that's certainly a con about this particular camera. The CL5 battery, like I talked about, it's just a little expensive. One battery, it's about $15. It's not really a con because it lasts for a long time. So, but some people may not be able to afford it because of, I guess it's a little expensive. So that's certainly a con. The LCD does not light up, so that is certainly a con. In the nighttime, you're gonna need a flashlight to see all the settings on the screen. But it's the good thing, like I mentioned, is that there's another LCD in the viewfinder that allows you to see the settings, the basic settings, and that one lights up. So in the nighttime, you're able to tell what settings you have on. So that's actually pretty good, I would say. So overall, this camera, I really enjoy shooting with this camera. I've just loved it ever since I got it. I have two of these, and I have another EOS, a couple more EOS cameras, and that's just because I fell in love with this camera so much. I certainly would recommend this camera to anybody out there that is willing to try film photography for the first time. If you're a digital photographer and you want to try film, I would recommend this. As of all my cameras, I would recommend this as the one to invest in. So I just want to thank you guys for watching this video and for joining me on this channel. I really appreciate it. I hope that you enjoyed the review. I know that it's quite a lengthy review, but I try to go into as much detail as possible. If you did enjoy this video, please click the like button. That would be very much appreciated. And as always, if you haven't subscribed already, please click the subscribe button. I'm always excited to get a new subscriber. This really encourages me to continue to do this, because I just do this for free, and I do it out of my own love and passion. But it's so encouraging when you guys click the subscribe button. I just want to thank you once again for joining me on this channel. I will be making a future video that will showcase some of the pictures that I've taken with this beautiful camera. In the meantime, I wish you guys a wonderful day and stay safe.